Okay, so the subject this evening is the concept of the 613 commandments. And what we're going to do is read at least certainly the introductory pages of an article from Wikipedia on the subject. I think it's a little even the introduction is a little over detailed. And then we'll glance at some of the lists because there's a whole bunch of different compilations of the 613 commandments. Um, I presume I'm just curious. How many of you have never heard of the concept of 613 commandments? Has everyone heard of that? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Um, it is interesting. Many people will keep referring to the Ten Commandments. I actually attended a wonderful lecture last night introducing. This was with my interfaith group. It was at a black AME church, an African. Well, AME is African Methodist Episcopal Church, and the pastor kept referring to the Ten Commandments, and he even mentioned, to love God and love your neighbor and so on. But that's not actually in the Ten Commandments. But anyway, it's another interesting thing. But certainly in Judaism, we continually talk about the concept of the 613 commandments. And um, one of the um, one of the things to understand is there are lots of compilations of the 613 commandments, and there is not one that is official. What you're going to see as we get into this article is that some of them actually agree on the number 613, and several attempts to compile all the commandments don't come up with the number 613 at all. Um, I mentioned, and this article will mention again and again, Maimonides, who wrote a book, and I actually have it in 2 volumes here. I'll bring it up closer so you can see the title and the translator. This is volume number 1, which is the positive commandments, and volume number 2, which is the negative commandments. And we'll see more information about that. And I actually don't know whether his original compilation was in Hebrew or in Arabic. I strongly suspect it was in Hebrew, um, but I'm not certain. And then people started asking the question about translators' bias, and so um, I would I'm just going to state my opinion broadly is that people who do these translations and are, the translations are accepted broadly. I would not say that they are biased, but I would say that whenever you translate from one language to another, you have to make decisions. Um, and actually, in thinking about the commandments, a classic one is the commandment not to take a human life, which is lo tirtzach. And my understanding is that is clearly thou shalt not murder. It doesn't mean thou shalt not kill. Um, there's another Hebrew word, harag, which means to kill. And so the issue then is, why is the King James translation read, and the famous translation, thou shalt not kill? And I once heard a scholar say that in the time of King James, the English word kill meant what we mean by murder, which means to wrongly take the life of a human being, rather than so the difference in killing and murder means to wrongly take the life of a human being. Killing means to take a life. So when we put, when you gargle with Listerine and you brush your teeth, you're killing bacteria, hopefully, when we use these and anyway, we kill all the time. We don't murder all the time. So why does the King James translation read thou shalt not kill? And the scholar I heard say this, and I've heard other scholars say, no, it's not true. But the scholar I heard say this said, in the time of King James, the English word kill meant what we mean by murder, and the English word slay meant what we mean by kill. So the supposition then is that the King James translation, written, I don't know, 500-600 years ago, was an accurate translation, but the English language has changed. So that I think is really a good example, and there are dozens more. And also, how do you do the count? in the Ten Commandments, in a Jewish listing, there's a different count than in a traditional listing. And it goes with things like, I am Lord your God who took you out of Egypt to be your God. You shall not have any other gods before me. Literally, al panai, in my face. So that's another question. Do you translate it literally in my face? Or do you understand the intent is in front of me? Is that one commandment or two commandments? The first statement is really not a commandment. I am Lord God who took you out of Egypt to be your God. But I think in one of the countings, maybe it's the Christian one, they count it as a separate commandment. In the Jewish counting, they don't. So there's all kinds of decisions that translators make, but I don't necessarily attribute it to bias. Alan.
My question has to do with about when the number 613 was fixed.
Okay, that's going to be the subject of the article.
Okay, fine.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, so Rabbi,
Yes.
may I ask you that, for instance, when first of all, I think the Ten Commandment, like this 613, is divided because the first five is between man and God, and the other five.
Yes.
Okay. Now, my other question is that, for instance, you shall not murder. When you say that, most of the people say that it is a physical activity because physically you murder somebody. Now I read, I don't know, it's not a midrash, but I read that once was a trial here in Los Angeles, and one of the Jewish rabbi said that the lawyers of the prosecution murdered the witness by his words. So you can murder somebody.
Okay, so hold on a second. But that he didn't mean that the person ended the witness's life.
Yeah. No.
Right.
No.
So what I would say is, I don't want to belabor it, but you can say whatever you want in whatever language you want.
But I mean,
So I can say,
interpret.
you've murdered the grammar of that sentence, or you've murdered common sense. But the commandment is about taking a human life. Now I don't know what else to say, but I don't think it's,
Okay.
I don't think it's worth, spending a
Yeah.
huge amount of time. Because I can say, somebody asked me a crazy question. I could say, you're killing me. I don't literally mean the person is killing me,
Yeah.
but it's a figure of speech.
Okay.
Isn't that somehow tied into Leviticus?
Sorry?
Something I remember reading, I can't remember exactly when, but with Leviticus, where if somebody says something that's
Yeah.
so negative, like killing, that it's considered murder in a
Yeah.
sense.
So there is a discussion of the laws of forbidding you to humiliate someone. And
Yeah.
some of the rabbis compare it to spilling blood, because when you embarrass someone, they turn white and or they turn red. But anyway, the blood is moving around. So I think that's what you're referring to.
Yeah.
Okay. So, okay, I think what no, I haven't started sharing, right? Okay.
Right.
Okay. So I will share. I think because I'm going to jump around and make comments a lot, I'm gonna read and give Joanna rest. So this is from Wikipedia, and as I mentioned, if we were to read this whole article, we'd be here for many, many weeks, because I don't know, it's pretty small, but up here there are 51 pages in this article, and the reason there are 51 pages is a lot of it is just listing the commandments, which we are definitely not going to read through one by one. According to Jewish tradition, the Torah contains 613 commandments, in Hebrew, tarag mitzvot. And the article is going to explain what that means. I think the word mitzvot means commandments. Tarag, as you'll see, is the gematria for 613. Although the number 613 is mentioned in the Talmud, its real significance increased in later medieval rabbinic literature, including many works listing or arranged by mitzvot. The most famous of these was the enumeration of the 613 commandments by Maimonides. And that's, well, you can't see me now, I think. Can you see me? Actually, that's an interesting question.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, I
okay.
can see you.
Because on the video, for some reason these days, the video is not showing me, just showing just the screen. But this is his, copies of his two books. I have to admit, I don't think I've ever opened these books to actually look for anything in them. So that's, yeah, I haven't actually plowed through every one of the books behind me. While the total number of commandments is 613, no individual can perform all of them. Many can only be observed at the temple in Jerusalem, which no longer stands. According to one standard reckoning, I could click on the footnotes. There are 77 positive and 194 negative commandments that can be observed today, of which there are 26 commandments that can only be observed in the land of Israel. I can't resist. So let me see if I just go way down to number one. That's the listing.
Why can you give us, are you going to get to a couple examples that only can be done?
No, so these really aren't. But
Sacrifice.
I can give you some examples. They're not hard.
The obvious
So,
sacrifices, since you have to do that at the temple.
yeah, so there's lots of laws about how you do sacrifices and the nature of sacrifices and how the animal status and so on. Clearly, those laws are no longer relevant, and the rabbis might disagree about whether if and when the Messiah comes again, whether we will start sacrificing again, and those laws may become applicable. And then there are other ones that are only observed in the land of Israel. And the one I always think of is the law of Shemitah, where you're supposed to let your land lie fallow once every 7 years during the Shemitah year. And that only applies inside the land of Israel. Why it only applies in the land inside of Israel, actually, I don't know. That would be an interesting study, but that's an example of that. In addition, some commandments only apply to a certain category of Jews. Some are only observed by Kohanim, the priests, others only by men or by women. So that's, I think you may know that there are particular privileges and things that are forbidden to Jews that trace their line back to Aaron, who are Kohanim, can't come in contact with the dead. You can't marry a divorced woman. And there's other there's lots of interesting things. And they get rights. They get the first reading of Torah. And clearly there are commandments that are understood by the rabbis to only apply to men, such as the requirement to pray 3 times a day. And there are other requirements that only apply to women. And they have to do with, I think, laws of family purity and menses. Okay. Symbolism of 613. Rav Hamnuna, a Talmudic rabbi, sourced the counting of 613 in the verse in Deuteronomy, where it says, Moshe tziva lanu, Torah tziva lanu Moshe. We actually sing this when we lift the Torah at a Torah Tovus. Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Moses commanded the Torah. So the Talmud notes in this discussion that the Hebrew numerical value, the gematria, of the word Torah is 611. So Taf is 400, Vav is 6, Resh is 200, and He is 5. So combining 611 commandments, which Moses taught the people, with the first 2 of the 10 commandments, which were the only ones directly heard from God, you get the number 613. That's one understanding of what happened at Sinai. There are lots of other understanding of what happened at Sinai, but if you go into the Talmud, that's where you see at least this number taught. Other sources connect the tzitzit, the ritual fringes of a garment, to the 613 by gematria. The word tzitzit, there you see it in Hebrew, and it's Mishnaic spelling. That's interesting. Has a value of 600. Sadi is 90. Yod is 10. Taf is 400. Each tassel has 8 threads when doubled over, and the 5 sets of knots. So the sum of all of those is 613, reflecting the commandment that the tzitzit reminds its wearer of the Torah's commandments. And that's what's actually in the Torah. It says, when you wear a garment that has 4 corners, you should put on the corners tzitzit, and those tzitzit will remind you of the commandments. Many Jewish philosophical and mystical works by the Baal HaTurim, the Maharal of Prague, and the leaders of Hasidic Judaism find allusions and inspirational calculations referring to the numbers of commandments. Descent and difficulties. I don't know if you can imagine this, but not everyone agrees among the rabbis of our tradition on all of these subjects, as shocking as that may be to some of you. Rabbinic support for the number of commandments being 613 is not without dissent. For example, Ben Azai held that there exists 300 positive mitzvot. Also, even as the number gained acceptance, difficulties arose in elucidating the list. Some rabbis declared that this count was not an authentic tradition, or that it was not logically possible to come up with a systematic count. No early work of Jewish law or biblical commentary depended on the 613 system, and no early systems of Jewish principles of faith made acceptance of this agadah, a non-legal Talmudic statement, normative. A number of classic authorities denied that it was normative. So that's just worth also a word of commentary. That is, when people study the Talmud, they often divide it into halachic material and agadic material. The halachic material is clearly relating to Jewish law. The agadic material, you hear the word that sounds like agadah, the word Haggadah, right? The book that we read on Passover. So the agadic material is more stories, and there's lots of stories, in the Talmud. I'll just give you an example about Abraham smashing the idols in his father's idol shop. Okay, that's a pretty well-known Talmudic story, and it is clearly not halachic. We don't derive any laws from that story. It is an agadic story. So apparently this idea of 613 is more agadah. And now they're going to go through a number of classical authorities who deny this as normative. So Abraham ibn Ezra says that there's lots of ways to calculate 613, but in truth, there's no end to the number of mitzvot. If we were to count only the root principles, the numbers would not reach 613. Nachmanides, who was a mystic in Spain, he concedes that the total has been proliferated through Agadic literature. We ought to say it's a tradition from Moses at Sinai and not, a requirement to believe it. Yeah, Alan.
When you use the story about Abraham and the idols, there's another, you said agada, but there's another word that I'm drawing a blank on what we call it when people create these stories.
Well, there's midrash.
Midrash.
Yes,
So
yes.
what's the difference between Agadah and midrash?
There's actually halachic midrash and there's agadic midrash. The word midrash means to draw out from the text. Lidrosh means to draw out or interpret. And so I would say the story of Abraham and the idols, and I think it's in the Talmud, it may be in the midrash, but Abraham and the idols is clearly agadic. So the concept of not mixing any milk with any meat, I would say, is halachic midrash, because clearly the Torah doesn't forbid you to mix meat with milk. The only thing the Torah says is don't cook a baby goat in its own mother's milk. But clearly we have laws about not eating milk with meat. And the rabbis basically are going to go into studying and drawing out from that lesson of not cooking a baby goat in its mother's milk they're going to draw out the idea that we should not mix any meat with any milk. So I would say that's a good example of halachic midrash. And there are collections of Agadic and halachic midrash.
Is the concept that I'm recalling that midrash also represents the part in the Torah that isn't said. You know, the Torah is very succinct.
Yes, okay, yes.
Midrash is a way of explaining the part that it doesn't actually say it. Am I saying
Yes.
that?
So another example of midrash is imagined other side of a dialogue. So for example, Moses is, I only know this because I wrote a paper on it in rabbinical school. Moses is at the edge of the Sea of Reeds, right? And hasn't yet split. And Moses is standing there, and I think he says, watch the power of God. Or I can't remember the detailed sequence, but in one place, God says to Moses, why do you cry out to me? But Moses hasn't cried out to God. So the Midrash is going to fill that discussion with what was Moses crying out and what was the discussion between God and Moses. So that's another example of Midrash. I would say Midrash is a very broad term, and it can have lots of examples, some of which are filling in the dialogue. There's another one where it says, God says, when he's commanding Abraham to sacrifice his son, God says to Abraham, take your son, your only son whom you love, and sacrifice him. And so the question is, why didn't God just say, take Isaac? Why did he say, take your son, your only son, the one you love? And there's kind of one midrash is God was breaking this to Abraham gently rather than just all in one sentence. And they imagine a dialogue, take your son. I have two sons. Your only son. He said, what do you mean I have an only son? Each one is the only son of their mother. Isaac's the only son of Sarah. Ishmael's the only son of Hagar. The one you love, I love both my sons. So the Midrash imagines this dialogue. So Midrash is a wonderful subject and worthy of a whole other course. Okay, so I'm not going to read every one of these, but suffice it to say, you have highly respected rabbis arguing that for the reason for the 613 and why it should be suggested or not suggested. And even when the rabbis attempted to compile a list of the 613 commandments, they were faced with a number of difficulties. Which statements were to be included among the 613? Every one of God's commandment to every individual or to the entire people of Israel? Actually, I don't even know where they come out on these. But in some places, God, let's say, commands Moses to do something or tells Balaam, to do something, go and bless the children of Israel. That is a commandment from God to Balaam. Is that a commandment to the people of Israel? That's a reasonable question. Would an order from God be counted as a commandment for the purposes of such a list? If it could only be compiled, maybe completed, compiled within one place and time. Else would such an order only count as a commandment if it could be followed at all times? So apparently that's the view of Maimonides, that it only counts in Maimonides' listing if it's not just a one-time thing. Does counting a single commandment depend on whether it falls in one verse, even though it may contain multiple prohibitions, or should each prohibition count as a single commandment? Ultimately, though, the concept of 613 commandments has become accepted as normative amongst practicing Jews, and today it is still common practice to refer to the total system of commandments within the Torah as 613 commandments, even among those who don't literally accept the count as accurate. However, the 613 commandments don't constitute a formal code of present-day halacha. halacha meaning Jewish law. Later, codes of law, such as the Shulchan Aruch and the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, do not refer to it. However, Maimonides' Mishnah Torah is prefaced by a count of the 613 commandments and mitzvot. And I don't know if this list comes from the Mishnah Torah or another source. Erwin.
I would like to ask you, my understanding is that when you read or I read or Alan reads the Torah, we can interpret the Torah differently. And even though that I think Moses said that you cannot put in or take away from the Torah, but can I or you or Alan interpret differently the 613 mitzvot?
So what we just read is that different sages throughout history have said there are not 613. There's a different number. They would argue about which one should be included. And I would say they would argue about, what's the meaning? So, for example, I'm pretty sure in the 613, you would see the statement, do not boil a baby goat in its own mother's milk.
Yeah.
But I don't think you'll find in there this idea of don't mix any meat with any milk. I mean, there's a story, you've probably heard me say it before. Moses is on Mount Sinai. God says, do not seethe the baby goat in its own mother's milk. And
Yeah,
Moses
but
says,
for example,
okay.
okay.
No, I'm just
fine.
telling a silly joke. Go ahead.
Okay, so what I'm saying is that, how you call it, to keep kashrut is mitzvot, but you can keep kashrut one way and I can keep kashrut another way.
Okay, so this is an important question. Because we count 613 commandments in the Torah, but the rabbis add thousands more. And kashrut is the perfect example. In the Torah, there is a list of, I'll just present it. Land animals, for a land animal to be kosher, it has to have split hooves and chew its cud. For fish, something in the sea, to be kosher, it has to have fins and scales. The birds to be kosher, there's a list. It doesn't, and you're not allowed to eat blood. And that's pretty much it. And I think there's one insect identified as being kosher. And that's it. So it doesn't say anything about kosher slaughtering. It doesn't say anything about milk and meat. It doesn't say anything about keeping two sets of dishes. It doesn't say anything about waiting 4 hours or 6 hours after you eat meat that you can eat milk. Those are all other commandments that the rabbis are going to add. And they're sprinkled throughout the Talmud, and then they will be codified in codes of Jewish law. The best known one is the Shulchan Aruch. And the point that's being made here is nowhere in the Shulchan Aruch is this presentation of 613 commandments. So
you give us many times this example. If you put cheese on your hamburger, you're not keeping kosher anymore. But God does not really know that.
Oh no, I never would say that. The question is whether God really cares about it.
If he cares about it.
So in Orthodox or kosher, in Orthodox or conservative Judaism, it is a commandment and it's absolutely binding. In Reform Judaism, there is an emphasis on individual autonomy with ritual rules. So I would say the Reform tradition is to say the ethical commandments are binding. The ritual ones, do I keep my head covered at all times? Do I pray 3 times a day? Do I observe the laws of family purity? Do I not touch my wife for half of the month? Do I keep strictly kosher? And so on and so on and so on. Those are between me and God. But the Orthodox and conservative would never say that. They would say, it's not up to us to judge which commandments God means. It's up to the rabbis, because it's the rabbis that are going to be making the decision. And that's what's going to go into these codes of Jewish law. And when we get different situations, like how do we handle electricity, we're going to leave it to the rabbis to figure that out. And that's a pretty general, but a pretty important element of Jewish law. And the rabbis are going to come to specific answers about these situations. So they're not going to leave it to you, me, and Alan to decide whether we can eat a cheeseburger. They're going to come to very specific answers. And, and we can get into some really interesting questions. Suppose you have a veggie burger. Is it okay to have a piece of cheese on the veggie burger? You would normally say yes, but there's a tradition of marat ayin, which is an offense to the eye. So I would say scrupulous Jews would not eat cheese on a veggie burger for fear of giving the impression that they're teaching that it's okay to eat cheese on a hamburger.
Well, am I glad I'm a Reformed Jew?
Yeah. So that's and Bacos and and artificial crab that you get in cheap sushi. Yeah.
But yet they don't have
and now you can do genetically engineered food.
Yeah, so then we get to the extreme, which is it's actually not so much genetically engineered, but food grown in a laboratory.
Yeah.
So if you just take meat cells, I think we've discussed this, and you grow it into sheets, the halakhic question is it meat? And the question goes back to the question, kosher meat is an animal that has split hooves and chews its cud. So the question is it meat? And there's a controversy now in Israel, at least the last time I checked, which has been a while, that there are some Orthodox authorities that would say that's not meat. So you can eat it with cheese. And they would also say if it's pork, it's not pork because it's something else. I'm not quite sure what it is, but it's not meat. So that's a great example of technology raising questions that are clearly haven't been decided in traditional sources. And, go back 100 years, you have a light bulb. It's electricity. Electricity isn't discussed in Jewish sources. So what is electricity? And the rabbis are going to conclude that electricity is fire. So the laws we have about starting and stopping a flame, we're going to apply to starting and stopping electricity. Yes.
But Rabbi, Rabbi,
hold on, stop. Everybody stop. Stephen, you had your hand up, and then I will call on Alan and then Erwin. Stephen, you were going to say something, I think.
Talking about the fake meat with dairy, and what I started to say was, but yet they don't have a problem with fake dairy with real meat. That having a meat meal and then a sherbet or whatever that's actually perfect, but looks like can taste like ice cream is okay.
Yeah. So yes, I agree with you, but it's labeled parv. So I would just say there's this concept of marat ayin. The example I came across once is a rabbi was invited to tape a TV show, which Orthodox rabbi, which was going to be aired on Shabbat, but he was going to tape it on, let's say, a Tuesday. So he wouldn't do it for reasons of marat ayin, because people watching the show might not realize that it was pre-recorded. So I'm saying this could be an issue, but at least, and there's been great examples of this in Jewish tradition, where at least in theory, the container should be labeled kosher and parv. And there was an example, I think, in the conservative movement where there was a non-dairy creamer, but it wasn't labeled kosher and parv. And there are certain non-dairy creamers that could have gelatin in them. So anyway, you get into the world of Jewish law, it gets more and more complicated. I'll just say it gets complicated. Alan, I'm not sure. Alan and Erwin, go ahead.
Okay. My question has to do with responsa. So the way you illustrated, let's say, conservative, reform, and Orthodox treat some of these subjects differently, and I'm trying to understand maybe historically, well, of course, that's a denominational thing. So probably my question relates to things that affect, I started in the 19th century, but before that, there were things after the Talmudic period that rabbis had to resolve things, right? Did we have resolve for the Orthodox or the?
So what you had was individual rabbinic legal scholars making decisions. And hold on, let me answer the question. And then you would follow the rabbis that were respected in your community. It wasn't that it was a different movement,
Right.
but it was a different community. And you're not supposed to go rabbi shopping to find one, that you agree with. And, a clear example of that would be Ashkenazi and Sephardic rulings that certainly are different, let's say, on the eating of rice on Passover. But also you have, Chabad ruling on things. So that would be for their followers, but it wouldn't necessarily apply to other followers. And then you have just great scholars like Soloveitchik, whose influence is very broad, but you have Rashi writing responsa. You have, so people that respect that rabbi would go by that rabbi's decision. And you might have an argument between different groups. When you have the movement started, in the Reform movement, there's the Responsa Committee of the CCAR, and then the conservative movement, there is the Jewish Law Committee, of which Elliot Dorff is the chair, or was the chair. I think he's still chair, but I'm not sure. But that's basically how it works. But there absolutely can still be controversy, as there is. We could presume this is still controversial. In Israel, there may be communities that are following the ruling of this rabbi regarding about what is meat and what's not meat. And even I almost hate to get into this. There are super mundane things like so you're not supposed to start or stop a fire on Shabbat. And the rabbis extend this to electricity. Everybody with me? So you don't turn a light switch on and off. If you've got a refrigerator, you got to be careful when you open the door, you're not turning on the light. And there's all kinds of problems with this. You don't push a button on an elevator. And we had all kinds of stuff like that. As far as I know, timers are not controversial. So you are allowed to have your lamp, let's say, in your bedroom on a timer. So it stays on Friday night until 11, and the timer shuts it off at 11 o'clock on Friday night. My sense is that's pretty well accepted in the Orthodox community. I remember reading with fascination the introduction of a different kind of light switch. Okay, you're either gonna, I think we're all gonna shake our heads about this. I'm almost sorry Jim is not here so I could watch his jaw drop on this. But you're all gonna shake your head on this, and some of you will absolutely hate this, and some of you may love this. And I don't know what the status is today. But apparently someone invented a kosher light switch for Shabbat. And they electronically set it so that anytime you turn the light switch on and off, there's only a certain probability that it will actually work. And at least some rabbis ruled that that was enough to get you off the hook. You might have to do it 5 or 6 times. I think it's absurd, but you might have to do it 5 or 6 times. But where there's a rabbinic will, where there's a halachic way. So it can get pretty crazy. Alan.
Just on the timer thing, I remember going to APAC conferences on Shabbat morning, and they wouldn't prepare percolated coffee the day before, but they would put the timer on to turn the hot water on.
That's interesting.
They wouldn't brew the coffee because that was work, but heating the water was not work.
Yeah, I don't understand that on any level.
I never did either. Okay, anyway.
but because the issue is turning on and off an electric current. I don't know why, but I bet there's a reason. They concluded that the act of preparing the coffee was work, whereas just heating water was not work.
Well, it could be.
There's issues of
I think
mixing.
I think part of it involves the prohibition against cooking, and that there's issues of like you can.
Yeah,
maybe that's it. Yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah.
Can the water be without it cooking the coffee grinds? And
yeah, but I don't know if the prohibition is against cooking specifically or starting and stopping a fire. But I don't know, and I have to say, never have I run into anyone in my community that would worry about that. But I will say, I spent the first from age 4 to about age 21, I was in the Catskills every summer. And I was, a kid and then a guest. And then typically I worked as a lifeguard. But occasionally we would, substitute and work in the kitchen. And, the unskilled labor in the dining room was a busboy. And these places, the hotels were all kosher. So there were separate sets of dishes. There were meat dishes, dairy dishes. There were separate dishwashing machines for meat and dairy and so on. And on Saturday morning, you could not get cooked food. So this is resembling, Stephen, so you're probably right on this. So you could get, cottage cheese, and you could get bagels and lox, but the waiters and the busboys worked twice as hard on Saturday morning because every order was much more difficult to fulfill. And of course, the waiters were working damn hard on Shabbat. So anyway, okay. I thought we would actually be finished early, but that's not going to happen. Okay, so we're going to get back into this text where there's no I don't think I read this. There's no single definitive list that explicates the 613 commandments. Lists differ, for example, in how they interpret passages of Torah that might be read with dealing with several cases under a single law or separate laws. And so see here for a visual comparison of several lists. So this is worth taking a look at. No, that's not it. Where's there it is. Okay. Can you see this rather interesting, colorful display?
Yes.
Yeah, we're not going to go through it. It's small. It's all in Hebrew. So yeah, and I know you can't really see it, but up here, so if I click over here, I'm clicking on something that says Kol HaMitzvot, and I'm just going to go down to the bottom, and there's 962 commandments. Okay, so that's one compilation, and then this one is Rambam, so that's Maimonides. So here's Maimonides' list, and I'll just observe that the first one in his list, it's also the first one in this book, is Lada'at Sheyesh Shem Elohav, know God's name, and that's from the book of Exodus. But anyway, if we go down this list, I think there's positive and negative commandments in two different colors. There's 365 negative commandments, and there's 248 positive commandments. And I think there's an interpretation, I think we're going to see this later, that the 365, of course, are the days in the solar year. The 248 is what they thought were the number, I think, of sinews. I can't even remember. And then there's Ramban, which is Nachmanides. And then this is comparing Ramban Nachmanides and Rambam Maimonides, comparing the two. So anyway, if you want more of this, boy, you know where to find it. Just keep clicking on links. Other commandments in the Torah are restricted to one-time acts and would not be considered mitzvot, binding on other persons. In rabbinic literature, Rishonim, early rabbinic commentators and later scholars, composed to articulate and justify their enumeration of the commandments. So here are a number of compilations, by this rabbi, by Sadia Gaon. Here's Sefer HaMitzvot, which is what I showed you, with a commentary by Nachmanides. Oh, that's interesting. Maimonides employs a set of 14 rules, shorashim, which means roots, which determine inclusion in this list. In this work, he supports his specification of each mitzvah through quotations from Midrash Halacha and the Gemara, and Nachmanides argues with him. So I'm just going to take a quick look. Yeah, so, again, I know you can't see this, but here's the first one, and it's relating to believing in God. And so he has a discussion, and it goes on for about a page and a half, at which point he picks up. I know this camera tries to follow me. On the second one, unity of God. So, and then there's other books, and again, I'm not going to go through it. And then there's a bunch of books in which the number of commandments are not 613, but another number. So,
Yes.
so now I just want to show you what's in this article. We are definitely not going to read this list because we're actually on page 4 of 51 pages in this article. So here is a sorting by canonical order. And what do we mean by that? We mean by the order that it appears in the Torah. So the first commandment in the Torah, it's interesting the way it's presented here, is to have children with one's wife. And that's Genesis 1:28. And it says, I'm just reading in the English now, I know it's small, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. It doesn't mention your wife there, but I'm just kind of quibbling with the way it's described here. And then Genesis 32, not to eat the sinew of the thigh. Remember, Jacob wrestles with the angel and he wrenches his thigh, and we're told that that's still not kosher to this day. Those are the only 2 commandments in Genesis. And then in Exodus, because there's going to be a lot of commandments about the Passover Seder, not to eat chametz, to break the neck of a donkey if the owner does not attempt to redeem it. That's something that doesn't come up in conversation very often. Alan.
So this example of be fruitful and multiply,
right,
which is directly from the Torah, but
yes.
It is one of the 613 commandments, correct?
All the 613 commandments are from the Torah.
But it's not equal, mutually, that's the right word. If you go through the Torah line by verse, you find every one of those, you only get 613, or
well, it depends how you count them.
Okay.
So again, if it's one, the only thing I'll offer is the following. What's sometimes counted as the first commandment is, I am the Lord thy God who took you out of Egypt to be your God. So then it says, don't have any other gods before me. Okay, that could be one commandment, could be 2 commandments. And then it says, you shall not bow down to them or worship them. So is that combined into one commandment, or are those separate commandments? So, and Rambam, apparently, Maimonides defends in this book how he makes that decision.
Okay.
But the bottom line is he's going to come up with 613. Okay. So again, I'm going to fly through this, but you can see in Exodus, there's lots of laws. I was going to actually look at the top one on every page. Don't remove the staves from the ark. Okay. That's a biggie. Anybody who knows evidence must testify in court, from Leviticus. A Kohen must not leave the temple during service. That's interesting. Okay. More in Leviticus. I'm going to keep going down. Probably go down. Oops. Now you got to do it this way. Okay. So I'm going to fly down there. So we're still in Leviticus. There's a bunch in Numbers, we have the commandment to have tzitzit on 4-cornered garments. And actually in that commandment, this one I just happen to know, it says if you have a 4-cornered garment, put tzitzit on the corners so that you will not follow the whims of your heart or what your eyes see. So in this compilation, they're counting those as 2 separate commandments. You could certainly make a case to count them as one. Just keep going down. Let's see what the last one is in Deuteronomy in this counting. Oops. Don't drink wine poured in service to idols. Okay, that's why we have kosher wine, which is an interesting one. I didn't realize it was the last one. And then typical order as typically presented. And I looked momentarily as I was preparing. This isn't exactly the same as Maimonides' order. So it's just a different order. So here they're starting in Exodus rather than in Genesis, and they're going to the Shema to know that God is one. So it's just another list. And if you want Rambam's list, you can buy the book. And then there's a bunch of references and a bibliography. Yeah, so that's the book that I have. Translated by Charles Chabel. And some more links. Okay. I'm gonna
Rabbi,
yes, go ahead.
May I ask you to go a little bit all the way up before these? Okay, hold on. Before these, because there was a sentence there from Maimonides that about the commandment that there are some commandments are relevant and some not. So
Right.
how do we do? No, it's all the way before these.
Yeah. No, I know what you're talking about. So
how do you determine which is a relevant commandment?
so if there are laws about how you make a sin offering in the temple,
yes,
and there's no temple, clearly that commandment is still a commandment in the Torah, but it's not relevant to us today. If the temple is rebuilt, it may become relevant, but it's not relevant today.
Okay, thank you.
And then I think he also may have been referring in that description when God commands Balaam to bless the Israelite people, that is a commandment from God to Balaam, but it was only relevant to Balaam. It's not relevant to us. So I think Maimonides was keeping the second one about how you do sacrifice in the list, but not keeping the first one. Stop sharing.
So I have two statements. One of them is if you go into a store and you eat veggie burger with cheese on it,
yes,
but you believe that you are eating meat with cheeseburger, you are not keeping the commandments.
So there's a lot of discussions that are about sins that are deliberate or inadvertent. And I would say it would be stated the other way, that if you believed it was a veggie burger and it turned out it was meat, have you committed a sin? Yeah. And the answer is yes, but it was not a deliberate sin. And deliberate sins are considered more serious than inadvertent sins. You think you're having turkey bacon because they sell it, and it turns out it was actually good old-fashioned pork bacon. If you committed that sin inadvertently, it's still a sin, but it's less serious than if you said, I don't think I like bacon, I'm going to eat it. I don't care if it's from a pig.
Okay. My other question is, if I don't know if this exists today in Israel, but if a Kohen Gadol blesses the troops in Gaza and they go and they kill other people, is that a sin? Because
so first, there's no Kohen Gadol. There are Kohanim. And then the question is the war a kosher war? Is it a legal war that's being fought? And there's a lot of discussion about what wars are legal and what wars are not legal. And I think there's serious discussion in Israel about whether the war in Gaza is a permitted war. And I don't know whether the authorities have ruled on that, the Orthodox authorities. But whether the priest blesses the troops, I don't think would have any bearing on it. The question is, legal wars are they're called milchemet mitzvah, commanded war, and milchemet reshut. A commanded war is a war of self-defense, and when you're defending yourself, you can fight on the Sabbath, and you don't have to obey. There's lots of laws, there are commandments in the Torah which says if a man has been married or plants a vineyard, but he's not harvested from the vineyard, he's exempt from military service. You don't, there are laws about Shabbat. If it is a commanded war, you're allowed to violate those laws because basically you're defending your life.
Wars against Amalek and the 7 Canaanite tribes are also commanded wars.
Yes, but that doesn't come up. So, and then they have to get King David off the hook because he fought a bunch of wars. So they come up with Milchemet Reshut, and they basically lump them into the ones that I think you're talking about, and other laws which says David was fine, but we're not allowed to. In theory, we could fight those wars, but we don't fight them on Shabbat. We don't. If anyone is afraid, they are not supposed to go fighting. You're not allowed to damage trees, fruit trees, and so on. There's a lot of commandments about how you fight a war, and if we really lived up to those commandments, you couldn't fight the war. Alan.
So one of the discussions I've been part of relative to the Gaza war has to do with time or the extent. In other words, I think it was generally accepted that the initial reaction to the October 7th behavior was a kosher law, a kosher war. However, as time has unfolded and different behaviors during the conflict raises the question, is it still a kosher war?
And it's actually, I mean, I probably ought to research this, but I'm not aware of Orthodox authorities saying the war is either still kosher or not kosher.
Yeah, no, my sources are not that either.
I don't think they can do. I mean, they shouldn't interfere because they do not participate in the war.
No, that's
there are Orthodox soldiers,
very
and
much
there are Orthodox parties in the Knesset, and I think they're part of the ruling government.
Yeah, Erwin, you're referring to the particular section called the ultra-Orthodox, because the religious Zionists, who are very much Orthodox and have contributed, unfortunately, many soldiers who have been killed, but still are very religious. So that doesn't answer the question that we're wondering whether there's been a rabbinic or rabbinate ruling on the war.
Yeah, and I'm actually surprised not to hear it, because I think that could cause the government to collapse if there was a respected rabbinic ruling, and the Orthodox parties, I presume they're part of the ruling coalition. I'm not actually 100% certain on that, but I presume that
the ruling coalition are part of the wanting to not end the war. So
No, I understand.
But those are politicians. They're not rabbis. So that's a different
but hold on. But there are Orthodox parties, and the heads of those parties, I believe, are rabbis.
And they just walked out, but not over the war. They walked out on the draft thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, politics in Israel is a little crazy, but my guess is that the Orthodox establishment still considers Gaza a war of self-defense.
Exactly.
And is therefore kosher. I think, reasonable people can disagree on that. I think there are many Israelis who would say we've actually gone too far and beyond simple self-defense.
That's right. That's the more secular world that I tend to travel in, is what you just
and the reform world, and
yeah.
I remember once, years and years and years ago, on the subject of should Israel fight to extend its borders to to the way Israel is described in the Bible? And I think even the West Bank and maybe Gaza was in the discussion. And I remember the chief Sephardic rabbi said no, because to do that, it would incur such tremendous loss of life that the loss of life is not worth pursuing the biblical objective of getting all the land. So again, when you have rabbinic rulings, you there's going to be logic, and protecting life is a very important value in Judaism. So it's one of the reasons I absolutely love Jewish legal questions.
I wanted to add one more thing. I happened to look up on Safaria is one of those resources that most of us go to for different things, and it's very convenient. Safaria actually, under the subject of the 613 commandments, they have it under Maimonides, what they call the Sefer HaMitzvot.
Yeah, and that's this book.
Okay, but I mean, that's a book, a printed book you published, right? You purchased, I should say.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's the English translation of Sefer HaMitzvot.
And that, but from a convenience and economic standpoint, and be able to search it, Safaria is a great.
Oh, yeah. No question. Yeah, Safari is a great resource. Yep. In fact, next time, we're going to discuss a very next week, because we finished the subject. Next week we will discuss a very interesting story, and it's the story of Chamsa and Bar Chamsa, and it's a story that not a lot of people are familiar with, but we should be, because it addresses the question of what did the Jews do to merit the destruction of the Second Temple. And there's a great story which we'll read, and actually the reason I mention it now is I'm using Safaria's study guide and study sheets for that, and I'm going to be sending it out tonight. Basically what it says is the reason for the destruction of the temple was meritless hatred of Jews for other Jews, and I would say overly focusing on the details of Jewish law, rather than which you wouldn't expect to find, I would say, either of those. So there's a story. So this is actually a great example of Agadah, and it probably also has halachic components. But anyway, it's a great story, and it's something we should be familiar with, and so we'll cover that next time.
So I would just add, if I could, is that Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove, who was a prominent conservative rabbi in New York, he wrote a book a book, and in the book I'm reading, he's covering that particular subject specifically. The two things you just said, I don't remember the Hebrew part. The comparison of the and so
in Hebrew it's called sinat chinom, meritless hatred, and I can't remember what the other
no, but the thing you just described of the
Chamsa and Bar Chamsa,
that part, I'm
yes.
reading that part particularly now, and somehow I read this book so slowly over 6 months that I moved from the book of Esther. Now I'm up to Tisha B'Av, and the calendar are in line with how slowly I read.
Right. Good job. Okay, we just passed the fast of 17th of Tammuz earlier this week. Yeah. Yes.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I have an interesting story. I read it a couple of days ago on the internet with illustrations and pictures that a group in Israel just purchased from Texas 5 red heifers.
Oh.
And they brought it to Israel, and they already have the drawings and everything ready for the third temple. and they have all the women already sewed together the garments
Yeah,
of
in the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem, there is an institute which have prepared all the fire pans and the menorah, and basically we are ready. We are ready to go.
Yeah, but I wonder
just
where
as soon
did
as World War III is over and the Temple Mount is cleared, and the radiation dies down to reasonable levels, we'll be ready to rebuild the temple. I'm not sure which planet we'll build it on.
But you think the 5 heifers gonna live?
Well, maybe they're descendants. They're descendants.
Yeah, and the significance of the red heifer, it's probably in the 613. To this, I really don't understand, and I really am not terribly even curious about it. But apparently, to have purifying waters to enable the priests to enter the temple, you need some kind of a mikveh equivalent with the ashes of a sacrificed red heifer. And the red, I can't even remember what a heifer is. I think it's a cow that hasn't reached sexual maturity, but I really don't know. And I think it's female, but I really don't know. But it absolutely has to be pure red. And I remember years ago, you would read in the paper that everybody would be excited because a pure red cow would be born, and I would say the Kabbalists, maybe the sort of religious fanatics, would say, Messiah is coming. It's the end of time. We're getting ready to rebuild the third temple. And then that poor heifer would spout one white hair.
Yeah.
And it's now barbecue instead of the third temple.
The other very interesting part was it's gonna be an engineering miracle that from the original city of King David, which is much outside of the wall, where the little spring flows, and they're gonna make it for the spring to go all the way up to the temple, and they're gonna have mikvah there.
Oh no, that I don't think is a big deal. That's Hezekiah's tunnel. I think there's still water flowing in it. I think I've walked through it years ago. And even the mikvahs are being I was supposed to actually be on a dig, and I decided my health wasn't up to it. And I actually saw a video today about that dig and how it's going.
Really?
And they're discovering mikvaot from Second Temple times. Yeah, no, that's not the problem. The problem is, what is the Arab world going to do when the Messiah decides we need to destroy the Dome of the Rock and rebuild and build the third temple? And so that is going to be an interesting time. Okay.
Good night.
I will wish you all a good evening, and see you next time. Take care.
Good night.
Good night.
Alan, send me a note if you're planning on doing that.
I'll know in a few days.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Okay. Yeah. Take care.